I thought I knew the man I was going to marry. Perfect job, perfect smile, perfect lies. But when a billionaire showed up at my door at 3 a.m., crying and begging for my help, everything I believed about love, loyalty, and justice crumbled in one devastating night. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, this story will shock you. Hit that like button and let's dive in. 2 years ago, I thought I'd found my soulmate. Blake Harrison walked into my life like something out of a romance novel. Tall, charming, with this infectious laugh that could light up any room. He was everything I'd dreamed of in a partner. A successful financial advisor and with his own practice, always dressed impeccably, always knowing exactly what to say to make me feel like the most important person in the world. Our relationship felt like a fairy tale from day one. He'd surprise me with my favorite coffee on stressful mornings, remember every detail about my day, and listen to me ramble about work drama like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. When he proposed 6 months ago on the rooftop of our favorite restaurant, with string lights twinkling above us and the city spread out below, I genuinely believed I was the luckiest woman alive. My friends were honestly a little jealous. "How did you find him?" they'd ask, watching Blake pull out my chair, or remember exactly how I liked my wine. My mother, who'd been skeptical of every guy I'd ever brought home, absolutely adored him. She'd call him the one who got away from some other lucky girl, and joke about how she couldn't wait for grandchildren. Even my dad, who barely spoke to any of my previous boyfriends, would light up when Blake came over to watch football. But here's the thing about perfection. It's exhausting to maintain. And lately, tiny cracks had started showing in Blake's flawless facade. He began working late more often, taking mysterious phone calls that he'd step outside for, always with an apologetic smile and some vague explanation about difficult clients. I'd catch glimpses of expensive receipts falling from his pockets, dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, purchases from stores we'd never shopped at together. When I'd ask about his sudden influx of expensive clothes, or that new watch that definitely wasn't there last week, he'd wave it off casually. "Work bonus," he'd say, or "client gift," always with that same charming smile that made me feel silly for questioning him. My gut kept whispering that something was off, but I silenced it every time. After all, this was Blake, my Blake, the man who remembered my coffee order and cried during romantic movies. What could possibly be wrong with finally finding someone who seemed too good to be true? Looking back, I should have listened to that whisper, because sometimes, when something seems too perfect, it's because someone is working very, very hard to make sure you never see what's really happening behind the curtain. And the truth that was hiding behind Blake's perfect smile was darker than anything I could have imagined. The whispers in my head started getting louder about 3 months before everything fell apart. Blake's late nights became the norm rather than the exception. He'd come home at midnight, sometimes later, with elaborate stories about difficult clients and market emergencies that always seemed to happen after business hours. When I'd suggest bringing him dinner at the office, he'd quickly shut it down with excuses about confidential meetings or strict building security. Then there were the phone calls. Blake had always been the type to answer his phone in front of me, but suddenly he was stepping onto the balcony, into the bathroom, or even outside our apartment entirely. I'd hear his voice through the walls, tense, urgent, completely different from the warm tone he used with me. When I'd ask who called, it was always work stuff or my buddy from college, but something about his body language screamed that he was lying. My breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon when I decided to surprise him at his office with lunch from his favorite sandwich shop. I was so excited to see his face light up, to do something sweet for the man I was planning to spend my life with. But when I walked into the sleek downtown building he'd described 100 times, the receptionist looked at me like I was completely lost. "Blake Harrison?" she repeated, checking her computer with a confused frown. "I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name working here." Are you sure you have the right building? My stomach dropped to the floor. I stammered something about making a mistake and practically ran out of there, my hands shaking as I called Blake's phone. When he answered, I could barely form words. There must be some confusion, he said smoothly. When I confronted him, I work with several firms, remember? That receptionist probably just started. But I could hear something in his voice, a slight panic, a careful calculation. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't believe him. That night, I did something I'd never thought I'd do. I went through his things. What I found made my blood run cold. Receipts from restaurants in cities he'd never mentioned visiting. Business cards from companies I'd never heard him talk about. And most disturbing of all, a phone I'd never seen before, hidden in the back of his sock drawer. When I powered it on, the recent calls showed one name over and over again. Harrison Knox. I'd heard that name before, in news articles about some tech billionaire with a reputation for shady business deals. Why was my fiancé talking to someone like that? And why did he need a secret phone to do it? As I sat there in our bedroom, surrounded by evidence that the man I loved was living a double life, I realized I didn't know Blake at all. The pounding on my door at 3:17 a.m. sounded like someone was trying to break it down. I jolted awake, heart racing, and grabbed my phone to call 911. But then I heard a voice through the door, desperate, broken, pleading. Please, I know you're awake. I need your help. It's about Blake. When I looked through the peephole, I couldn't believe what I saw. Harrison Knox, the billionaire whose name had been haunting my thoughts for weeks, stood in my hallway. But this wasn't the polished businessman from magazine covers. This man was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face streaked with tears. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Against every instinct screaming at me to call the police, I opened the door. The moment our eyes met, Harrison Knox collapsed into my door frame and started sobbing like a broken man. I'm so sorry, he kept repeating. I'm so sorry. You have no idea what he's done to you. What came next shattered my world completely. Harrison told me everything. How he and Blake had been running an illegal investment scheme for 18 months. How they'd been stealing money from elderly clients and laundering it through fake businesses. But the part that made me physically sick was learning how I fit into their plan. Blake had never loved me. I was what they called the perfect cover story. A hard-working, honest woman with a clean background and good credit. While I thought we were building a life together, Blake had been using my name, my address, my social security number to create fake business accounts. My apartment wasn't our love nest. It was their criminal headquarters. The engagement ring I'd been showing off to my friends, bought with stolen money from a 78-year-old woman's retirement fund. Harrison pulled out his phone and showed me bank statements, recorded phone calls, email threads that made my stomach turn. Blake's voice, cold and calculating, talking about me like I was just another business asset. She's perfect, I heard him say in one recording. Completely trusting, asks the right questions but not too many. She'll never suspect anything. The FBI was closing in, Harrison explained. Through his tears, warrants would be issued in the morning. He was turning himself in, but Blake had disappeared with over $2 million of their victims' money. He's done this before, Harrison whispered, showing me photos of 3 other women from different cities. All of them looked like me, young, professional, trusting. All of them had been used the exact same way. As I sat there in my living room at 4 a.m., looking at evidence that my entire relationship had been an elaborate con, I felt something break inside me that I didn't think could ever be fixed. But underneath the heartbreak and betrayal, something else was building. A burning, righteous anger that would fuel what came next. I knew exactly where Blake was hiding. There was only one place he'd go when everything fell apart. The cabin where he'd proposed to me 6 months earlier. It was supposed to be our special place, but now I realized it was probably where he'd taken all his other victims too. The thought made me sick, but it also made me determined. Harrison and I drove through the night in complete silence. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for Mrs. Catherine Williams, the 78-year-old grandmother whose retirement money had bought my engagement ring. I was doing it for all the people who'd trusted Blake with their life savings while he was busy playing house with me. When we pulled up to the cabin at dawn, I could see Blake through the window, frantically shoving clothes into a suitcase. My heart should have been breaking seeing him like this, but instead I felt ice-cold clarity. This man had stolen 2 years of my life, convinced me I was crazy for questioning him, and used my love as a weapon against innocent people. The moment Blake saw me walk through that door with Harrison, his face went through every emotion imaginable: shock, fear, anger, and then that familiar, manipulative smile that used to make my knees weak. "Baby, thank God you're here," he said, reaching for me like nothing had changed. Harrison's lost his mind. He's trying to pin his crimes on me, but I wasn't the same trusting woman who'd fallen for his lies. I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Tell me about Mrs. Williams, Blake. Tell me about the other women. Tell me how long you've been planning to disappear with that money." His mask finally slipped completely. The charming, loving fiancé vanished, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snarled. "You were just supposed to be quiet and grateful. I gave you the best 2 years of your pathetic little life." That's when I smiled and showed him my phone screen. "I've been recording everything since Harrison showed up at my door. The FBI is already on their way here, Blake. They've been listening to this entire conversation." I watched his face crumble as he realized his perfect plan had fallen apart. The man who'd manipulated me for 2 years, who'd made me question my own sanity, was now the one who looked completely lost as sirens wailed in the distance. Blake tried one last desperate plea, grabbing my hands and begging me to run away with him, but I was done being his victim. When the FBI agents walked through that door, I handed them my phone with a steady voice and watched as they put handcuffs on the man I'd almost married. Justice, it turned out, was even more satisfying than I'd imagined. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment, one that Blake never stepped foot in, never contaminated with his lies. The trial is over. Blake got 15 years for fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. Harrison got 8 years for cooperating and helping us recover most of the stolen money. Mrs. Williams got her retirement fund back, and so did the other victims. But the real victory wasn't watching Blake get led away in handcuffs, though I won't lie, that felt pretty incredible. The real victory was discovering who I actually was underneath all his manipulation. For 2 years, Blake had been carefully molding me into his perfect victim: quiet, trusting, grateful for his attention. He'd convinced me that questioning him meant I was insecure, that my instincts were wrong, that I was lucky he put up with my paranoia. Rebuilding my life meant learning to trust myself again. It meant recognizing that my gut feelings weren't character flaws. They were survival instincts that had been trying to save me all along. Those late-night phone calls, those mysterious receipts, that feeling that something was just off. I'd been right about everything. I just hadn't been brave enough to believe in myself. I started volunteering with a support group for financial fraud victims. Listening to their stories, I realized how textbook Blake's approach had been. He'd chosen me carefully, young enough to be naive, successful enough to have good credit, isolated enough from family to make his manipulation easier. But hearing other survivors talk about their journeys back to themselves reminded me that being targeted by a predator doesn't make you weak. It just makes you human. The woman I am now would never have fallen for Blake's act, not because I'm bitter or closed off to love, but because I know my worth now. I know what real love looks like, and it doesn't require lies, manipulation, or making someone doubt their own reality. Real love doesn't hide behind secret phones and fake identities. Real love doesn't steal from grandmothers to buy engagement rings. Sometimes people ask me if I regret those 2 years, if I wish I'd never met Blake at all. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain he caused, the innocence I lost, the way he made me question everything about myself. But I don't regret becoming the woman who emerged from that wreckage. She's stronger, wiser, and completely unafraid to trust her instincts. 3 weeks ago, A friend tried to set me up on a blind date. "He's perfect," she said, and I laughed out loud because I've learned that perfect is just another word for too good to be true. And when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. My intuition saved me once. I'll never ignore it again. If this story hit you as hard as it hit me to live through it, I need you to do something for me right now. Smash that like button, because stories like this need to be heard. Someone watching this might be ignoring their own red flags, convincing themselves that their perfect partner couldn't possibly be hiding something this dark. Have you ever had a gut feeling that saved you from disaster? Maybe you dodged a bullet with someone who seemed too good to be true, or maybe you wish you'd trusted your instincts sooner. Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because next week I'm sharing another story that will leave you absolutely speechless. It's about a woman who discovered her best friend's shocking secret through a grocery store receipt. Trust me, you won't see that twist coming either.